I never believed a single wrong turn could rewrite an entire future, but that was before Las Vegas taught me that luck always comes with a price. My name is Ethan Brooks, and if you had met me the morning I arrived on the Strip, you would have seen nothing more than another exhausted 26-year-old carrying a worn duffel bag, a resume full of temporary jobs, and a dream that had already survived too many disappointments. The city glittered beneath the desert sun like a promise nobody could afford to keep. Towering hotels reflected endless blue skies, while giant digital billboards flashed fortunes waiting to be won, but I knew better than to trust appearances. Vegas wasn't built on winners. It was built on people like me, ordinary people hoping that one extraordinary moment might finally change everything. I had accepted a short-term position at a luxury hotel preparing for one of the biggest charity galas of the year. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was enough to keep my tiny apartment back in Phoenix for another month while I searched for something permanent. That alone felt like a miracle. My coworkers laughed easily, traded stories about celebrities they had served, and joked that every guest arrived carrying a secret. I smiled politely, though I doubted secrets belonged only to the wealthy. Some of the heaviest ones were carried by people with almost nothing. Mine certainly was. Ever since my parents passed away, I had measured success in much smaller victories than anyone else. Paying rent on time, keeping food in the refrigerator, answering every phone call without fearing another overdue bill. Survival had quietly replaced ambition, and I barely noticed when it happened. Still, standing inside that breathtaking marble lobby on my first morning, I allowed myself one dangerous thought. Maybe this city would be different. Maybe this would be the place where life finally stopped pushing back. The hotel manager gathered our team before sunrise, assigning responsibilities with military precision. Every chandelier sparkled. Every flower arrangement stood perfectly balanced. Every polished surface reflected the illusion of perfection expected from guests, willing to spend thousands of dollars for a single evening. My assignment seemed simple enough. Assist the event coordinator, greet arriving vendors, and make sure nothing disrupted the carefully choreographed schedule. I welcomed the routine. Predictability felt comforting after years of uncertainty. Around mid-morning, a black SUV rolled beneath the grand entrance, drawing the attention of nearly everyone nearby. Valets straightened their jackets. Executives adjusted their ties. Even seasoned employees lowered their voices. Whoever had arrived clearly mattered. I kept organizing guest packets, pretending not to notice until a calm voice behind me asked, "Excuse me, is this where today's event begins?" I turned instinctively, expecting another vendor. Instead, I found myself meeting the steady gray eyes of a man whose expression revealed almost nothing, yet somehow made the bustling lobby seem strangely quiet. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of us spoke. It wasn't recognition exactly. It felt more like the unsettling certainty that two completely separate lives had just crossed a line neither of them could ever erase. The man offered a polite smile that barely softened the quiet authority in his face. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said, his voice calm enough to disappear beneath the gentle music filling the lobby. I was told the event coordinator would be here. I glanced at the folder in my hands before realizing I was standing exactly where visiting guests had been instructed to check in. "You are in the right place," I answered, forcing myself to sound more confident than I felt. "May I have your name, please?" His eyes lingered on my employee badge for a fraction of a second before he replied, "Nathan Carter." The name alone explained the sudden change in everyone around us. Even though I rarely followed business news, I recognized it immediately. Nathan Carter was one of the youngest executives to build a hospitality empire stretching across several states. Rumor described him as disciplined, intensely private, and almost impossible to impress. Yet standing only a few feet away, he looked less intimidating than unexpectedly tired, as though carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. I checked the guest list and found his name near the very top. VIP, personal meeting with the charity board. Full access to every restricted area. I handed him his event credentials with both hands. "Welcome, Mr. Carter. If there is anything you need today, please let us know." Instead of immediately walking away, he looked around the enormous lobby with quiet curiosity. "Is this your first event?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Most important guests never asked employees anything beyond directions. I laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" A faint smile appeared, almost too subtle to notice. Only because you are paying attention to everything. I followed his gaze toward the ballroom entrance where florists were making last-minute adjustments. I cannot really afford mistakes. Neither can I, he replied. Before I could think of an answer, one of the hotel executives hurried over, greeting Nathan with practiced enthusiasm before escorting him toward a private conference room. The moment he disappeared behind polished wooden doors, the lobby seemed strangely ordinary again. My coworker Melissa nudged my shoulder with a grin. Do you even know who that was? I nodded, only because I recognized the name. She lowered her voice dramatically. People say he remembers every employee he has ever promoted and every person who ever lied to him. I cannot decide which story is more frightening. I laughed, assuming she was exaggerating, and returned to organizing registration packets. The rest of the afternoon rushed forward in a blur of deliveries, schedule changes, and unexpected requests. By sunset, the ballroom had transformed into something almost unreal. Crystal lights shimmered across polished floors while an orchestra rehearsed quietly beneath towering arrangements of white roses. Guests in elegant evening wear began arriving one after another, filling the room with effortless conversation and polished smiles. Hidden among them, I felt invisible again, exactly where I preferred to be. But as I carried a stack of updated seating cards toward the entrance, I sensed someone watching me. Looking up, I found Nathan standing across the ballroom, speaking with several board members. For reasons I could not explain, his attention drifted away from the conversation and settled briefly on me. It lasted no more than 2 seconds before he politely excused himself and continued walking toward another group of guests. Still, the unexpected moment stayed with me. It was not admiration or curiosity that unsettled me. It was the strange feeling that our paths had not crossed by coincidence, and that whatever had quietly begun that morning was only now taking its first real step. The evening settled into an elegant rhythm that almost made me forget I was working. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across the ballroom, while conversations blended into a soft hum that sounded more like distant waves than hundreds of voices. I moved carefully between tables, updating seating arrangements, answering quiet questions, and making certain every guest found exactly where they belonged. It was exhausting, but for the first time in months, I felt useful instead of simply surviving. Just before the charity auction was scheduled to begin, the event coordinator hurried toward me with visible concern. Ethan, one of our keynote speakers, is delayed because of airport traffic. We need someone to deliver these revised presentation folders to the executive lounge upstairs immediately. I accepted the leather portfolio without hesitation. I will take care of it. The executive lounge occupied the highest floor of the hotel, accessible only by a private elevator requiring temporary authorization. After confirming my credentials with security, I stepped inside and watched the city slowly unfold beneath the rising elevator. Through the glass walls, Las Vegas stretched endlessly into the desert, every neon light beginning to glow as daylight disappeared behind distant mountains. It looked less like a city and more like a sea of stars resting on the ground. When the elevator doors opened, silence replaced the excitement of the ballroom below. Thick carpets absorbed every footstep. Modern artwork lined the hallway. The atmosphere felt peaceful, almost detached from the celebration taking place. Downstairs, a receptionist quietly directed me toward a conference suite where several board members were preparing for the next portion of the evening. As I approached, the door opened before I could knock. Nathan stepped into the hallway carrying a tablet and nearly stopped when he recognized me. "You found the place without getting lost," he said with the same calm tone I remembered from earlier. I smiled. I almost took a wrong turn. Most people do. He glanced toward the portfolio in my hands. "For the meeting?" I nodded and handed it to him. The coordinator asked me to bring updated materials. Instead of immediately returning inside, he looked toward the enormous windows overlooking the city. "Have you ever seen Las Vegas from up here?" I admitted that I had not. He stepped aside, allowing me to approach the glass. The view was breathtaking. Endless lights stretched across the valley while fountains danced below like tiny streams of silver. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Nathan said quietly, "People come here believing every light represents opportunity. Sometimes they forget that every light also casts a shadow." His words lingered in the silence. I found myself answering honestly without understanding why. I think people keep chasing hope because the alternative is much harder. He looked at me with an expression I still could not fully understand. It was thoughtful rather than distant, almost as if he recognized something familiar inside my answer. Before either of us could continue, another executive called his name from inside the conference room. Nathan gave a polite nod. "Thank you for bringing these up personally, Ethan." Hearing my name spoken so naturally surprised me. Hundreds of employees had been working throughout the hotel, yet somehow he remembered mine after only one brief introduction. As I rode the elevator back toward the ballroom, I tried convincing myself that it meant nothing. Successful people probably remembered details because that was how they stayed successful. Still, the quiet conversation stayed with me far longer than I expected, and somewhere deep inside, an unfamiliar feeling began to grow that my temporary job had already become something much more permanent than I had ever intended. The gala ended well after midnight, but the energy of the evening lingered long after the final guests had departed. Hotel staff moved quietly through the grand ballroom, clearing crystal glasses, folding linen napkins, and carefully packing floral arrangements that had looked almost magical only a few hours earlier. I helped wherever I was needed, grateful that physical exhaustion was easier to manage than the strange thoughts occupying my mind. Every time I remembered my conversation with Nathan, I found myself replaying his words, searching for meaning where there was probably none. By the time I finally stepped outside, the desert air felt refreshingly cool against my face. The famous boulevard still pulsed with light, music, and endless traffic, but for the first time all day, I could hear my own thoughts. My apartment was nearly 20 minutes away by bus, and I welcomed the quiet ride. The following morning, I arrived at the hotel earlier than scheduled, expecting another ordinary shift. Instead, I found the management office buzzing with unusual excitement. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering with expressions that mixed curiosity and nervous anticipation. Melissa spotted me almost immediately and hurried over. "You missed the announcement," she said. "Corporate is launching a new hospitality leadership program. They are selecting only a handful of employees from across several properties." I smiled politely while hanging my jacket inside the staff room. "That sounds like something for supervisors." She shook her head. "Apparently not. Anyone can be nominated if senior leadership notices exceptional performance." Before I could respond, our department manager entered carrying a folder. "Ethan Brooks?" he asked. I raised my hand instinctively. "Please come with me for a moment." My heart immediately sank. Unexpected meetings rarely brought good news. I followed him into a conference room where several executives reviewed documents spread across a polished table. To my surprise, Nathan was sitting among them. He looked up briefly as I entered, offering the same composed expression I had come to recognize. The manager gestured toward an empty chair. "Relax. You are not in trouble." A few quiet laughs eased the tension in the room. One executive explained that several guests had submitted written compliments praising the professionalism of hotel staff during the charity event. My name had appeared repeatedly, including in comments regarding calm problem-solving, attention to detail, and respectful communication. I struggled to believe what I was hearing. I had simply been doing my job. "We would like to invite you to participate in the leadership assessment," another executive said. "There is no obligation, but it could open doors if you are interested in long-term opportunities." Before I could answer, Nathan finally spoke. "Talent often hides in places where nobody thinks to look. Sometimes all it needs is one opportunity." His voice remained measured, directed toward the entire room rather than only me, yet somehow the words felt personal. I accepted the invitation with sincere gratitude, still convinced there had been some misunderstanding. As the meeting concluded, employees returned to their responsibilities while executives prepared for their departures. Nathan collected his portfolio and paused beside the doorway. "Congratulations, Ethan," he said. "Do not underestimate what consistent kindness can accomplish." Then he walked away without another word, leaving me standing in the conference room with a simple folder in my hands and the unmistakable feeling that my future had quietly shifted direction once again. The leadership assessment began the following Monday, and from the moment I stepped into the corporate training center, I realized this was unlike any interview I had ever experienced. There were no intimidating speeches or impossible trick questions. Instead, Every exercise focused on people. We were asked how we would comfort frustrated guests, resolve misunderstandings between coworkers, and make difficult decisions without sacrificing honesty. I answered each question the only way I knew how. I imagined my parents listening to every word and chose the response that would have made them proud. By the end of the first day, I felt certain I had fallen behind the others. Many participants already managed entire departments or supervised large teams. I was simply a temporary employee who still checked every expense before buying groceries. During the lunch break, I slipped outside to a quiet courtyard where fountains softened the sounds of the city beyond the hotel walls. I sat alone with a sandwich from the employee cafe, reviewing my notes and wondering whether I had been foolish to believe I belonged there at all. Mind if I join you? The familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. Nathan stood nearby holding nothing more than a bottle of sparkling water. He was dressed far more casually than during the gala, yet he still carried the same quiet confidence that seemed effortless. Of course, I replied, quickly clearing the empty chair across from me. For several moments, we simply watched the water ripple beneath the afternoon sun. Finally, Nathan spoke. You looked uncomfortable inside. I laughed softly. I was trying very hard not to look uncomfortable. That earned the faintest smile. There is a difference. I looked down at my notebook. Everyone else seems more qualified than I am. Nathan considered my words before answering. Experience teaches procedures. Character teaches judgment. One can be trained. The other cannot. His response settled into my thoughts with surprising weight. I had spent years believing that success belonged only to people with impressive backgrounds or expensive degrees. Somehow Nathan made it sound as though ordinary kindness had value beyond anything written on a resume. Why are you involved in this program? I finally asked. You could delegate all of this. He glanced toward the fountain before answering. Because years ago someone noticed potential in me when I had not yet earned it. I promised myself I would do the same whenever I had the chance. There was no arrogance in his voice, only quiet certainty. Before I could ask anything else, his phone vibrated gently. He checked the screen, apologized, and stood. Duty has excellent timing. As he prepared to leave, he paused for a brief moment. One more thing. Ethan. I looked up. Do not spend your energy comparing your first chapter to someone else's 10th. Then he walked back toward the conference center, disappearing through the glass doors with the same calm pace he always seemed to have. I remained beside the fountain long after he left, repeating those words in my mind. When the afternoon assessments resumed, I stopped worrying about competing with everyone else. Instead, I focused on each conversation, each challenge, and each opportunity to help the people around me. For the first time in many years, I was not trying to become someone different. I was simply discovering that the person I had quietly become through every hardship might finally be enough. The final day of the leadership program arrived more quietly than I expected. There were no dramatic announcements or elaborate ceremonies waiting for us. Only one last assignment that seemed almost too simple. Each participant received the profile of a fictional hotel facing financial pressure, declining employee morale, and growing customer complaints. We were told to build a recovery plan, but the instructors emphasized that our solution would be judged not only by numbers, but by the people affected by every decision. While others immediately filled whiteboards with budgets, charts, and projections, I found myself thinking about the employees who greeted guests before sunrise, the housekeepers who worked long hallways without recognition, and the maintenance teams whose names most visitors would never know. A successful hotel was not only built with marble floors and elegant chandeliers. It was built by people who believed their work mattered. When it was my turn to present, I spoke honestly instead of trying to sound impressive. I explained that guests remembered how they were treated long after they forgot the design of the lobby. I suggested investing in employee training, mentorship, and recognition before launching expensive marketing campaigns. I admitted there were risks, but I believed that respected employees naturally created memorable experiences for guests. The room remained silent after I finished, making me wonder whether I had misunderstood the assignment entirely. Then one of the senior executives leaned forward. Why did you focus so heavily on culture instead of revenue? I answered without hesitation. Because people create revenue. If employees feel invisible, guests eventually will too. The executive slowly nodded and wrote something in his notebook. The discussion continued for nearly another hour before everyone was dismissed while the review panel finalized its evaluations. I walked into the hallway feeling surprisingly peaceful. Whatever happened next, I had finally spoken with complete confidence instead of trying to become the person I thought everyone expected. As I waited near the elevators, Nathan stepped out of the conference room carrying a thin folder. "You look calmer than you did on the first day," he observed. I smiled. "I stopped trying to win." "And what did you start trying to do instead?" I considered the question for a moment. "Be honest." A look of quiet approval crossed his face. "That usually lasts longer." Before either of us could continue, the program director invited all participants back inside. The room felt noticeably smaller than before. One by one, names were announced as placements and future assignments were revealed. Some participants accepted management positions in other cities. Others received specialized training opportunities. I listened politely, genuinely happy for each of them, while quietly preparing myself to return to my temporary position after the program ended. Finally, the director looked toward me. "Ethan Brooks." I stood, expecting little more than a certificate of completion. Instead, the director smiled. "The review committee has unanimously selected you for our Emerging Hospitality Fellowship. This includes a full-time management development position, professional education sponsorship, and direct mentorship from our executive leadership team." For a brief moment, I could not process the words. The room filled with warm applause as I looked instinctively toward Nathan. He did not celebrate with dramatic gestures or proud speeches. He simply gave a small nod that seemed to say he had expected this outcome all along. In that quiet moment, I realized the greatest opportunity one had received was not the new position itself. It was finally believing that the future I had spent years doubting might actually belong to me. The fellowship began with a schedule that challenged every assumption I had ever held about leadership. Instead of assigning me to a single department, the company rotated me through every corner of the hotel over the following months. One week, I worked alongside housekeeping before sunrise. The next, I assisted engineers maintaining systems most guests never noticed. I spent evenings with restaurant managers learning how dozens of small decisions shaped every dining experience, and early mornings observing front desk supervisors welcome travelers from every part of the country. The work was demanding, but every new responsibility revealed another layer of an industry I had once believed was only about beautiful buildings and luxury. It was really about trust. Nathan appeared only occasionally during those rotations, usually arriving without warning and leaving just as quietly. He never interrupted daily operations or asked whether I had completed specific assignments. Instead, he asked questions that stayed with me long after the conversations ended. "What surprised you today? Who taught you something unexpected? What mistake became your greatest lesson this week?" At first, I searched for impressive answers, but I quickly realized he valued honesty more than perfection. One afternoon, I admitted that I had made an error while coordinating room availability for a conference group. The mistake had been corrected before any guests noticed, yet I still felt embarrassed. Nathan listened without judgment before asking, "What changed because of it?" I explained that I had created a better verification system to prevent the same problem from happening again. He nodded with quiet approval. "Then the mistake has already earned its place." Those simple conversations slowly changed the way I viewed failure. It no longer felt like proof that I did not belong. It became evidence that I was still learning. As the weeks turned into months, familiar faces throughout the hotel began greeting me by name instead of introducing themselves. Melissa often joked that I spent so much time visiting different departments that nobody knew where I actually worked anymore. She was probably right. Yet every new assignment strengthened relationships with employees whose dedication had once gone unnoticed by me. I discovered that the quiet maintenance technician remembered the birthdays of everyone on his team. A veteran housekeeper kept extra bottled water for coworkers working double shifts during the summer heat. A young concierge stayed after hours each Friday to mentor newly hired staff without ever mentioning it to management. Excellence was everywhere once I started paying attention. Near the end of the fellowship, I received an invitation to meet Nathan in one of the hotel's private observation lounges overlooking the city. The familiar skyline shimmered beneath the evening sky, reminding me of the first time I had stood there carrying nothing more than a delivery folder. Nathan handed me a small envelope without saying a word. Inside was a photograph taken during the charity gala months earlier. It showed me speaking with an elderly guest near the registration table, completely unaware that anyone had captured the moment. On the back, a single handwritten sentence read, "Character is revealed when you believe nobody is watching." I looked up, uncertain what to say. Nathan smiled, warmer than I had ever seen before. "You thought that evening changed your career," he said quietly. "It did something much more important. It revealed the person you had already become." As I looked through the window at the endless lights stretching across the desert, I realized the city itself had never changed my life. It had simply become the place where someone finally helped me see the value that had been there all along. The fellowship officially concluded at the beginning of autumn, but its lessons followed me into every decision that came afterward. My new role placed me on the management team responsible for guest experience across several departments. And for the first time, people looked to me for answers instead of instructions. The promotion came with a larger office, a better salary, and responsibilities that once would have seemed impossible. Yet the greatest change was not professional. It was personal. I no longer walked through the hotel wondering whether I belonged there. Instead, I asked myself how I could help someone else feel the same sense of belonging that had once been given to me. One morning, while reviewing employee feedback reports, I noticed the name of a recently hired front desk associate appearing repeatedly beside comments about nervousness and lack of confidence. Curious, I spent part of my afternoon observing from a respectful distance. The young employee greeted every guest with sincerity, but hesitated whenever unexpected situations appeared. I recognized that uncertainty immediately because I had once lived inside it myself. Rather than correcting every small mistake, I invited him to join me for coffee after his shift. We talked about work, family, and the pressure of wanting to prove ourselves. By the end of the conversation, I realized I had repeated several of Nathan's questions without even thinking about it. What had surprised him today? What had he learned? What would he do differently tomorrow? The answers mattered less than the confidence growing behind them. Weeks passed, and I watched his posture become steadier, his smile more natural, and his conversations with guests increasingly effortless. The transformation reminded me that encouragement often changed people more effectively than criticism ever could. Late one afternoon, I received a calendar invitation from Nathan asking me to meet him on the rooftop terrace after sunset. The familiar skyline shimmered beneath thousands of lights as a gentle desert breeze carried away the warmth of the day. Nathan stood quietly near the railing, looking across the city that had connected our lives months earlier. Without turning around, he asked, "How is your newest employee doing?" I smiled, surprised that he already knew. "Better every week." He nodded. "And what helped him most?" I considered the question carefully before answering. Someone believed in him before he believed in himself. Nathan finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw unmistakable pride in his expression. "Exactly." He reached into his jacket and handed me a thin folder containing plans for a new mentorship initiative that would expand across every property in the company. At the bottom of the final page, beside the program director's signature, my name appeared as co-founder. I looked up in disbelief. "Why me?" Nathan answered with complete certainty. "Because the strongest leaders are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who remember exactly what it felt like to stand at the beginning." I closed the folder slowly as the lights below stretched endlessly across the valley. Months earlier, I had arrived carrying a worn duffel bag and hoping only to keep my apartment for another month. Now I understood that success was never measured only by promotions or titles. Its truest measure was whether the opportunities we received became opportunities we were willing to create for someone else. Several years have passed since that first unexpected conversation in the hotel lobby. Yet there are moments when I still pause before walking through the front entrance each morning. The marble floors remain polished, the chandeliers still cast warm reflections across the lobby, and guests continue arriving with dreams, celebrations, worries, and stories known only to them. Some things never change, but I have learned that the people inside those moments do. The mentorship program has expanded far beyond what any of us imagined. Every new employee is welcomed not only with training manuals and schedules, but also with someone willing to listen, encourage, and remind them that confidence grows one day at a time. Watching those relationships develop has become the most rewarding part of my work. Promotions, awards, and recognition eventually become framed certificates on quiet office walls. The confidence you help build in another person continues long after those certificates gather dust. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from a young supervisor who had completed the program 2 years earlier. He thanked me for believing in him when he doubted himself and shared that he had recently been promoted to oversee an entire property in another state. At the end of the letter, he had written one sentence that stopped me for several minutes. He said that he hoped one day someone would thank him for doing exactly what had been done for him. I folded the letter carefully because I realized it described something much larger than career success. Kindness had become a tradition instead of an exception. Not long afterward, Nathan invited me to join him once again in the observation lounge overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly beneath the evening sky, just as it had on the day we first stood there together. Neither of us spoke for a while. We simply watched the lights appear one by one across the valley. Finally, Nathan smiled and asked, "If you could speak to the person who arrived here carrying only a duffel bag, what would you tell him?" I looked through the glass, remembering every fear that had once seemed impossible to overcome. "I would tell him that life changes quietly," I answered. "Not all at once. Not because of luck. It changes one honest decision at a time, one kind conversation at a time, and one person willing to believe in another before there is any proof they should." Nathan nodded slowly. "Then you have learned the lesson better than I ever could have explained it." As we left the lounge, I glanced toward the busy lobby below where another new employee was greeting guests with the same mixture of hope and uncertainty I once carried. For a brief moment our eyes met, and I smiled because I understood exactly how that journey felt. I walked downstairs, introduced myself, and asked the same simple question that had once changed my own life in ways I never expected. The future rarely announces itself with fireworks or grand speeches. Sometimes it begins with a single conversation, a quiet act of respect, and the choice to see potential where others see only another stranger passing through. Looking back now, I no longer believe that one wrong turn can rewrite a future. I believe one person can, and sometimes that is all it takes for an ordinary life to become an extraordinary story.